Death Note is easily in my top 3 favorite anime, and if you've seen it, I'm sure it's one of yours too. There's not too much to say about Death Note that hasn't been said already. The quality of the stories and characters created by Tsugumi Oba truly do speak for themselves. It's a masterpiece of storytelling that implements a gripping cat and mouse dynamic flawlessly. So flawlessly, it quite literally defines the trope, reaching beyond anime. Death Note remains poignant in how it deals with heavy and grounded themes of morality, justice, and crime, all topped with outstanding atmosphere and music. The story of Death Note is fantastical to a degree, but in the universe it establishes, nothing it tries to accomplish ever feels cheap, and frankly, it truly is one of the greatest anime and manga of all time. Suffice to say, I am a Death Note enjoyer. So when I saw that a Japanese-only Death Note game had finally been fan-translated into English, I immediately knew I had to talk about it. So let's get into this obscure little game. Side note, when the English fan translation dropped, it had only been out for like maybe a week when I started this video, but then From Software dropped Elden Ring. And suffice to say, I took a bit of a break with only about an hour of the Death Note Kira game remaining to finish the absolute endeavor that is Elden Ring. And here we are. So shut up. What do you want from me? What do you want? An apology? What do you want me to get out the ring light? No makeup? To do a big sigh? Oh, I never thought I'd have to make a video like this. Shut up. Shut the hell up.
I've made a severe and continuous lapse in my judgment.
Death Note Kira game is a Nintendo DS Japan-only game that was released in 2007, developed by Konami. It's a fun little strategy game in which you play as one of 19 Death Note characters and assume the role of either L or Kira, while any number of CPU are also participating. The goal is to deduce which player is your opponent, Kira if you're playing as L and L if you're Kira, and convince the other players to vote them out while not getting yourself voted out. While the overall objective seems simple, the mechanics present here can get rather complex. Kira game works in 3 phases: investigation, voting, and I'm just gonna call the last one role action. The investigation phase goes through every character and has them perform an action. These actions cost varying amounts of influence points, which you can see here. These replenish to an extent each time a player's turn starts. Actions can either place doubt, accuse another player of being Kira, or add trust to them, stating they're not Kira. When a character commits to an action, everybody else is allowed to either agree or disagree with their action. This can make their action more effective if agreeing, or have the opposite effect if disagreeing. If a player is disagreed with, they're able to counter that by starting an argument. This goes back and forth until one player gives in or doesn't have enough influence points to continue arguing. When it comes to your turn, you're able to choose one of multiple actions that will either cast doubt or add trust to another player, with the effectiveness of your actions correlating to the influence point cost. You're also able to use a stun action instead of a regular action if you want. Stun actions are high-cost abilities that have special effects, such as raising your maximum influence, reducing doubt of every player, replenishing your full influence, etc. And a character-specific unique action that has a special effect, such as setting your own doubt to 0. This depends on the character you're playing. Stun actions can't be contested by other players. Each player has a doubt and a trust meter. Doubt meters fill as doubt is placed upon you. It has 2 thresholds that once passed will place a check beside that player on the HUD, visible to everybody. If a player has a check, they're more likely to be voted out. Since multiple players can have checks, this doesn't mean it's guaranteed, and you'll have to work carefully to ensure the right people have checks and you do not. Trust meters work a bit differently. Unlike doubt meters, trust meters are unique between each player. An example would be Matsuda has max trust with Light, but every other character will have varying levels of trust with Light, depending on the amount of trust interactions they've had with him. The higher trust you have with another player, the less likely they are to vote you out, and vice versa, no matter the number of checks you have. A little bonus if you're playing and reach max trust with a player, they will give you a little bit of help narrowing down who L is. Reaching max trust with another player will be really only helpful if you're Kira, as you now know which actions from CPU to disregard, but playing as L, it also doesn't hurt to raise trust with other players, as they'll be less likely to falsely vote you out. I'm aware this may sound a little confusing, but it's super intuitive after a few rounds. It's really only as complicated as the player chooses to make it. Next up is the voting phase. The voting phase begins after however many rounds that are specified pass in the game. Each player votes based on their trust and doubt of everyone else, and if more than half of the players vote on one character, then they're voted out. If a character that isn't Kira is voted out, L will lose 20 points off of their max influence for the rest of the game. If neither L or Kira is voted out, then we move on to the roll action phase. Here, Kira and L are both granted a unique action to use. Kira may use the Death Note to immediately vote out a character they suspect is L, but if Kira is wrong, their max influence will be halved for the remainder of the game. L is able to investigate any character to determine if they are Kira or Kira's follower. The Kira's follower role doesn't really matter that much. It's basically a red herring for L, and for Kira, they'll be less likely to accuse or start an argument with you. You are not able to play as this role in the game. So that's the main structure of the gameplay for Kira game. Go through the 3 phases, rinse and repeat. There's 3 gameplay modes in Kira game, those being story mode, single mode, and multiplayer mode. Single mode is just a free play type mode that's a more customizable Kira game where you can choose your role, character, number of CPU, and number of rounds. Multiplayer mode, I unfortunately haven't been able to give a try because I don't have any friends. It uses 2 separate cartridges and has you and a friend taking on the role of Kira and L. The goal remains the same here, it's just both roles are played by real people instead of CPU. It seems like it'd be really fun. Unfortunately, here I am, nothing to report on that, but in concept, hell yeah. The final mode is story mode, so let's talk about that a bit. Story mode picks up around the second art of Death Note, where, minor Death Note spoilers, Light is working with L, going by the codename Ryozaki at this point, and his father's investigation team to catch Kira. It follows the story from here all the way up until the end of the Yotsuba Corporation arc. No complaints with the story, it's pretty damn beat for beat, and we get a lot of beautiful sprite art to go with it, plus some fun added scenes that naturally segue to whoever's in the story at the time playing the Kira game. The story mode is purely a vehicle the game uses to put you in unique situations for the Kira game, making you play as specific characters with a specific role, and sometimes non-optional win conditions attached, such as don't allow your doubt to go above 50 throughout the Kira game. It works really well considering if you were just playing single player mode repeatedly, it could grow stale very quickly. The story mode isn't particularly long. The total footage I recorded for my entire time with the game is around 5 hours. That's going over everything the game has to offer except multiplayer because I don't view this as a bad thing, to be honest. I think even though the game isn't very long, it maintains a good level of quality throughout. If the story mode was, say, 8 hours long, I could easily see the gameplay growing stale. There are sequels to this game. As they're not translated yet, I can't say for sure whether or not they expand on the base gameplay of this title, but I really hope they do. I really feel as though I've had my fun with this formula, and there's so much room to grow with the Kira game mechanics. I'd love to see the argument mechanic expanded on, with multiple players being able to engage in chains and perhaps even ways for you to cite reasons as to why you're making a particular point. It would be more tense to have your opponent playing more aggressively. I was only ever voted out once in my entire playthrough, and it was just because of a stun move by another CPU. It was complete bullshit. They literally used it the round before voting, so I couldn't even do anything to stop it.
I can't fucking compete! I just can't fucking compete! Can you get the fuck out of my face?
There's even room for some quality of life stuff here, like the thinking screen between player actions could literally not exist, because when you're playing with CPU, you're not actually waiting for anyone to make a choice. The overall pace of gameplay could be picked up considerably. I'd like to see the CPU use stun actions more and even maybe make them cost less influence points to encourage this for the player as well. The trust mechanic could be expanded on so much more. I've had bizarre cases where somebody I have full trust with still votes me to be arrested, which doesn't make sense according to the game's own rules. It would be nice to see more dynamic animations and dialogue variation, which would be nice considering context-sensitive dialogue interaction only really happens very rarely. And sometimes the base phrases that characters will say to each other don't make sense when you hear the response from the other character. These issues are mainly things I noticed in hindsight and near the end of the game. It works perfectly for what it is and remains fun and interesting considering the length of the game. but making a sequel with nothing changing would be a recipe for getting bored really fast. There's a lot of really cool shit that Kira Game has to offer. First off, it's a very solid adaptation of this point in the story of Death Note. I only noticed one significant moment missing from the story, so all things considered for this tiny little cartridge, that's pretty impressive. It features beautiful sprite art that I hope this game finally being translated will bring some more attention to, because like seriously, this is free real estate. Look at how cool this shit looks. The music is really good. It's different tonally from the anime, but for the DS specifically, it makes total sense why it sounds the way it does. And there's genuinely some bangers in here. There's plenty of attention to detail in the writing, and that carries over into the gameplay. An easy example being Miso referring to Mogi as Mochi when interacting with him, and I just think that's real cute, okay? Sue me. Don't get me wrong, Death Note Kira Game is not some DS must-play hidden gem, oh my god, how could Konami not bring this to the West, deal. But for a fan of Death Note, it is super worth playing. There's plenty of fun to have with it, and lots of little treats for fans that are familiar with the series and characters. I definitely wouldn't recommend somebody who isn't familiar with Death Note to start here. Read or watch it, and if it's your jam, then absolutely give it a shot. It's a good time. At this point in time, the general concept of the gameplay here has been greatly expanded on by unrelated titles, but there's absolutely a boatload of charm to this concept in its early stages, especially when it's accompanied by a nice lathering of Death Note paint on top. Now, if you've made it this far in the video and have not read or watched Death Note, what are you doing? I cannot recommend it enough. It's worth mentioning that the anime is available to stream on quite a few big names, and if subtitles are not your thing, it's literally one of the few that takes an immense amount of effort in its English dub to preserve the original Japanese cultural implications and artistic intentions of its dialogue and story, on top of being amazingly performed. Even if you don't like anime, you will like Death Note. I can promise you that. So watch the anime or give the manga a read, and if it's your thing, which it will be, give this game a shot and send the fan translation team a big old thanks while you're at it. I'll have links to them in the description. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I'll give you a big old kiss on your mouth if you're so kind to leave me a subscribe, like, and comment. If you want to hear more from me, you can find me on Twitter at GhoulFMV. Real quick, I'd just like to say apologies for the upload gap once again. I was rather busy slamming my head repeatedly into drywall courtesy of From Software. But hey, considering the time I picked up this project again, it did get done pretty fast if we cut out the Elden Ring saga. I shouldn't have another large upload gap for a minute. I've already had the next video in the works, so please do stay tuned. I think that's all for me, so until next time, I'm Ghoul. Thank you for watching, and love ya. Mwah.